The Ghost at Skeleton Rock. This is Red Chair reading. I am Hobie Wan. Chapter 9, The Ticking Suitcase. Maybe Jack went to the shop to get something, Tony said. In pairs, the boys began their hunt. When they met again a short time later, their faces registered failure. I'll call the motel where Jack lives, Frank decided. He might have gone to his room to get something. Hopefully, the four boys hurried to the waiting room. Frank made the call. I really bungled that, didn't I? Let me try again. Hopefully, the four boys hurried to the waiting room. Frank made the call. Is he there? Joe asked anxiously when his brother emerged from the booth. Frank shook his head. The manager said Jack left a couple hours ago. For a moment, the boys were silent, wondering what their next move should be. Suddenly, Joe snapped his fingers. We haven't checked Jack's plane. Let's go look. With quick strides, the boys headed for Hangar B, where their father and Jack kept their planes. Jack's sleek, silver-winged craft stood in one corner of the big corrugated iron building. Frank reached the plane first, climbed up, and jerked open the cabin door. He stepped short and gasped. Slumped on the floor was the huddled form of Jack Wayne. He's here, unconscious, Frank reported. Good night, cried Joe. Gently, the boys lifted the pilot out of the plane and laid him on a pile of tarpaulins. Is he badly hurt? Chet asked. I think not, Frank replied, taking Jack's pulse, which was even. Just knocked out. In fact, I believe I smell chloroform in here. Frank moaned and stirred. Thank goodness it's nothing worse, said Joe. In a few minutes later, still woozy, Jack was able to sit up. What? Where? He murmured, shaking his head from side to side. Take it easy, Frank advised. Oh, hello, fellows, Jack said shakily. Chet Morton brought him a drink of water. While the pilot was sipping it, Frank and Joe went off to question the man in charge of the airport at the time, Bert Hildreth. Did you notice strangers prowling around early this morning? Don't recall seeing any, said Hildreth, a tall man with a weathered, beaten face. In fact, no one's been out to the field this morning. Except when this young man showed up at 5 o'clock, he pointed to Joe. Me? Sure, don't tell me you've forgotten our conversation. Frank and Joe looked at each other, startled. The early morning visitor to the airfield must have been the one who resembled Joe, the contact man for the theft ring. Hildreth was puzzled. What goes on here? He asked. You fellas mixed up in a mystery? Yes, said Frank. Joe and I didn't arrive until a few minutes ago. He explained that the police were looking for a suspect who resembled Joe. He might even be made up to look like him. Well, I'll be doggoned, said Hildreth. That fellow sure is your double. I asked if Wayne had filed the takeoff time for your flight. I said, no, not yet, but he told me last night you'd be leaving around 6. Then he walked off toward the hangar. Joe's eyes widened as a frightening thought struck him. I have a hunch we'd better check our plane and get it good. Check it good. The boys hurried back to the hangar, where they found Jack Wayne fully recovered. He told them he had been about to step into the Hardy plane when someone had sneaked up behind him and put a rag with chloroform under his nose. That's the last I remember, but why would anyone want to knock me out? So he could sabotage our plane before takeoff, Frank replied grimly and related Hildreth's story. Good night, exclaimed Jack. If that's the deal, we'd better go over the ship with a fine-toothed comb, or we may wind up in the drink. Worried, the group towed the big blue and white craft out onto the hangar apron. Under Jack's supervision, they began a thorough check. Engine, landing gear, control cables, elevators, ailerons, trim tabs. Everything seemed to be in order. Even the radio and flight instruments showed no signs of tampering. Frank relaxed a bit. I guess my hunch was wrong. Anyhow, I'm glad we made it, sure. But we still don't know why Jack was attacked, Joe pointed out. Well, while the pilot went off to file his flight plan, the others refreshed themselves with some hot cocoa at the airport lunch counter. Later, as Jack warmed up the engine for takeoff, the boys lugged their baggage out to the ship. Frank squatted just inside the cargo compartment in the rear of the plane and checked off each item as the others passed them to him. 2 bags for Joe and me, he sang out. 3 bags for Chet, 1 suitcase for Tony, and a bag of 2 suitcases for Jack already stowed aboard. Jack turned around. Hey, did you say 3 for me? I brought only 2. I'll bet Chet slipped in an extra one full of chow, Tony joked. Either that, or he's trying to sneak his dummy aboard as a stowaway, Joe chuckled. Suddenly, Frank turned pale. Say, what if that fellow who chloroformed Jack planted the extra bag? It could mean... The pilot had already jumped up from his seat and hurried aft. These are my 2 suitcases, he said, pointing them out. Frank grabbed the extra bag from the cargo space and held it to his ear. It's ticking, he cried. A time bomb! There was an instant of near panic as Jack and the boys stood frozen with fear. Should they leap from the plane and leave it to blow up when the bomb went off? Or should they take a chance and try to carry the bag to a safe distance? Frank glanced at his watch. It was 6:33. The person who planted the bomb probably figured he wouldn't be airborne just yet, so the bomb must be set to explode a few minutes from now. Out of my way, boys, he cried. Before anyone could stop him, Frank jumped up from the plane, bag in hand, and sprinted down the runway. Near the edge of the field, he paused and hurled the bag toward a vacant, brush-covered lot beyond. He was halfway back to the plane when the whole airport rocked under a sudden explosion. Frank was hurled to the ground by the tremendous blast. Joe and the others ran to help him as dirt, brush, and debris rained down on all sides of the blast area. Ooh, look at that cool drawing. That's cool. Oh, sides of the blast area. Oh, Frank, are you all right? Joe cried, reaching his brother and kneeling down beside him. Sure, just a little shaken up. And me too, said Chet. Man alive, I thought you were a goner. The stout boy's face was ash white, and the rest of the group looked equally shocked. By this time, the airport was in an uproar about it, and it was some time before anyone was reassured that the bomb planter had directed his venom only toward the Hardys. Meanwhile, Frank made a full report over the phone to Chet's chief colleague. Finally, a signal for departure was given, and the graceful blue and white plane took off on its flight to Puerto Rico. Everyone relaxed as the plane headed out over the Atlantic. The boys sat quietly and thought about the case. What sort of racket were they up against? Obviously, its members would stop at nothing to gain their objectives. The young sleuths had already had enough close scrapes to be sure of that. Frank and Joe each took turns at the controls as Jack instructed them in long-range flying and navigation. It was nearing lunchtime when a voice came crackling over the plane's radio navigation frequency. Sky Sleuth, 118 How Baker. This is Tancho Radio. Do you read? Frank clicked the plane's transmitter to the proper frequency. He then picked up the microphone and spoke into it. Tancho Radio, this is Sky Sleuth. 118 How Baker. Read you loud and clear. Go ahead. 8 How Baker, this is Tancho Radio. Bayport Tower has requested us to convey a message to you from Mrs. Hardy. You are requested to land at Centro in Tropical. Repeat, land at Centro in Tropical. Over. The boys were puzzled. Why land at the new Caribbean island democracy? Frank decided to check. Tancho Radio, this is 8 How Baker. Would you please contact Bayport Tower and have them call Mrs. Hardy? We would like to verify that message. Stand by. Several minutes passed before the communicator's voice again crackled from the loudspeaker. 8 How Baker, this is Tancho Radio. Bayport Tower reports they called your home. No answer. Can we be of further assistance? Over. This is 8 How Baker. Negative. We are proceeding to Centro. Please change our flight plan accordingly. Over and out. Shifting course to the right, Jack headed southwest toward Tropical. Finally, the lush green shores of the island came into view. The pilot consulted a map as they flew inland, and soon they sighted the bustling city of Centro. Arrowing in toward the airfield on the outskirts of town, Jack cleared with the tower and made a smooth landing. Almost before the plane rolled to a stop, a man in a white suit came running out to meet them. He was tall and dark with a long, drooping mustache. As the boys climbed out of the plane, the stranger shoved a note into Frank's hand, then dashed off the field. Puzzled, Frank unfolded the paper and read the typewritten message. It said, Danger! Do not come. Dad. Uh-oh. That's the end of chapter 9. Click the button over there for the next video, the next chapter, and be sure to like and subscribe. Thanks. Bye.